The howling winter wind rattled the windows of Jack Colton's dilapidated saloon as Gideon Zimmerman slammed back another shot of whiskey, his reputation hanging in the air like gunsmoke. The year was 1879, and the notorious gunslinger had become as much a part of La Junta, Colorado's folklore, as the harsh elements that swept across the plains. Every head turned as he entered a room, every voice hushed when he passed by, not out of respect, but fear. "Another," Gideon growled, sliding the empty glass toward the barkeep, who hurriedly filled it with amber liquid. "You're gonna drink yourself to an early grave, Zimmerman," Jack said, wiping down the counter with a dirty rag. "That'll be $3 you owe me now." Gideon's cold gray eyes, the color of winter storm clouds, flickered up. He was 32 years old, though the lines etched into his weathered face and the silver streaking his dark hair suggested a man who'd lived several lifetimes of hardship. 7 notches on his gun belt, 7 men who'd crossed him and paid with their lives. The last had been 3 years ago, but memory ran long in these parts. "Put it on my tab," he muttered, downing the shot in one swift motion. "Tab's getting mighty full." Jack hesitated. "Sheriff Donovan's been asking about you." Gideon's hand instinctively moved to the well-worn Colt revolver on his hip. "What's Miller want now?" "Nothing like that. There's a stage missing. Left Denver 3 days ago, should have been here yesterday morning. With this blizzard, he's worried." Gideon glanced toward the window. Snow had been falling steadily for 2 days, unusual even for December in this part of Colorado. The thought of a stagecoach stranded in this weather made even his hardened expression soften momentarily. He'd seen men freeze to death in less harsh conditions. "Not my concern," he said finally, reaching for the bottle. Jack pulled it back. "Rumor is there was a woman on board, traveling alone." Gideon scowled. Women traveling alone were either desperate or foolish, sometimes both. Still, it wasn't his problem. He'd learned long ago that getting involved only led to pain. His ranch 10 miles outside of town was remote for a reason. He preferred the company of his horses to people. The saloon doors burst open, bringing a flurry of snow and Sheriff Everett Miller, his badge gleaming against his heavy coat. "Zimmerman?" The lawman's voice carried across the room as he stomped snow from his boots. "Need a word." Gideon didn't turn. Already having won with the whiskey, Miller approached, removing his gloves, found the stage, overturned about 15 miles north. Driver and guard, both dead looks like bandits, hit them before the storm. "Casualties of the territory," Gideon replied, unmoved. He'd seen enough death to last several lifetimes. There was a passenger list. Woman named Olivia Hayes, traveling from Boston, no sign of her among the dead. "Maybe the bandits took her," Gideon suggested, finally turning to face the sheriff. Miller shook his head. "Tracks suggest someone walked away from the wreck, small footprints heading west into the hills." "Then she's already dead," Gideon said flatly. "Nobody survives a night in these hills during a storm like this." "Maybe," Miller's eyes narrowed. "But someone might survive 2 nights if they found shelter. You know those hills better than anyone, Zimmerman. Your ranch is closest to where those tracks were heading." Gideon understood the implication. "No. I'm not asking you to be a hero," Miller said. "Just to look. You were an Army scout before. Everything else, if anyone can find her." I said no. Gideon stood, towering over the sheriff. "I don't save people. That's your job. I've got 3 men with frostbite already from searching and another blizzard rolling in by nightfall." Miller's voice hardened. "I'm not asking, Zimmerman. I'm telling. You owe this town." Gideon's hand twitched near his gun. "I don't owe anyone a damn thing." "What about Eliza?" Miller said quietly, and the name hung in the air between them like a ghost. Gideon's face darkened dangerously. "Don't you dare speak her name. She'd want you to help." Miller pressed on, knowing he was treading on dangerous ground. "This woman, Olivia, she could be someone's Eliza." For a moment, the saloon fell silent, everyone present wondering if they were about to witness Gideon Zimmerman gun down the sheriff. Instead, he threw a handful of coins on the counter, grabbed his coat, and stormed toward the door. "If I find a corpse, I'm bringing it to your doorstep, Miller," he called over his shoulder. The bitter cold hit Gideon like a physical blow as he mounted his stallion, Thunder. The black horse snorted, steam rising from his nostrils in the frigid air. Gideon pulled his hat low and wrapped a scarf around the lower half of his face. "Come on, boy," he muttered. "Let's go find ourselves a dead woman." The snow made tracking difficult, but Gideon hadn't survived as a scout by being anything less than exceptional. He followed the barely visible trail, noting where the woman had fallen several times, where she had changed direction, apparently disoriented. The wind cut through his heavy coat, and he could only imagine how the city woman from Boston had fared in such conditions. As the light began to fade, Gideon spotted something dark against the white landscape. Approaching cautiously, he saw a figure huddled against a rocky outcropping, nearly covered by drifting snow. He dismounted, approaching slowly, expecting to find a corpse. To his surprise, he saw a slight movement, the faint rise and fall of breathing. Kneeling beside her, he brushed away the snow. She was wrapped in what appeared to be several layers of clothing, including a man's coat far too large for her slender frame, likely taken from one of the dead men at the stagecoach. Smart, Gideon thought grudgingly, but not smart enough to avoid the hills. He turned her gently, revealing a face that, despite being reddened from cold and partially frostbitten, struck him with its delicate beauty. Dark lashes rested against pale cheeks, and her lips had taken on a bluish tint that alarmed him. "Miss," he shook her. "Miss Hayes." Her eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing irises the color of amber whiskey before closing again. Gideon cursed. She was alive, but barely. If he didn't get her warm soon, she wouldn't make it through the night. His ranch was closer than town, about 2 hours' ride in these conditions. "All right, city girl," he muttered, lifting her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and her body was terrifyingly cold. "Let's see if we can't cheat death one more time." He settled her carefully on Thunder, then mounted behind her, cradling her against his chest. The woman's head lolled against his shoulder, her breath coming in weak, shallow gasps. Gideon spurred his horse forward, riding hard against the approaching darkness and the storm that threatened to bury them both. By the time Gideon's ranch appeared through the swirling snow, his arms were numb from holding the unconscious woman and fighting the rains. The modest 2-story house, built of sturdy logs, had never looked so welcoming. A thin trail of smoke rose from the chimney. His foreman, Eduardo, must have kept the fire going. "Eduardo," Gideon shouted as he maneuvered his horse to the front porch. The ranch hand appeared immediately, eyes widening at the sight of his boss cradling a half-frozen woman. "Dios mío." Eduardo hurried forward. "Who is she?" stagecoach passenger. "Take the horse," Gideon ordered, dismounting carefully while keeping hold of Olivia. "Get him rubbed down and fed." Gideon carried her inside, the warmth of the house hitting him like a physical force after hours in the bitter cold. He laid her gently on the bearskin rug before the fireplace, then added several logs to build up the flames. "Eduardo's wife is visiting her sister in Pueblo," Gideon said to himself, realizing the predicament. There was no woman present to help with what needed to be done. With a resigned sigh, he began removing Olivia's wet outer garments. Her fingers were stiff and unyielding, her skin alarmingly cold to the touch. Frostbite had begun setting in on her hands and face. He'd seen men lose fingers and toes to less. "Don't you die on me now, Miss Hayes," he muttered, working quickly but carefully. "Not after I rode through hell to find you." He removed only what was necessary, covering her with warm blankets before retrieving a basin of water and clean cloths. With gentle movements that would have surprised anyone who knew his reputation, he began warming her extremities, carefully rubbing life back into her frozen fingers. As he worked, Gideon studied her face. She was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 25, with features that spoke of refinement and education. Her dark brown hair, now damp and tangled, would likely be beautiful when properly tended. What was a woman like this doing traveling alone to La Junta? The town was growing, but it was hardly a destination for Eastern socialites. Olivia stirred slightly, a soft moan escaping her blue-tinged lips. Gideon felt a flutter of relief. At least she was responsive. "Can you hear me?" he asked, his normally gruff voice softened. "Miss Hayes." Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Gideon continued his ministrations, focusing on her hands and feet, checking periodically for signs of severe frostbite. By the time Eduardo returned from the stables, Gideon had managed to get some color back into her skin. "She lives then," Eduardo observed, removing his hat as he entered. "Barely," Gideon replied. "Prepare the guest room, extra blankets, and heat some broth. She'll need something warm inside her if she wakes." "If," Eduardo raised an eyebrow. When Gideon corrected himself, though uncertainty gnawed at him, he'd seen the cold claim stronger individuals. "And send word to Sheriff Miller in the morning. Let him know I found her alive." Eduardo nodded and set about his tasks. Gideon continued his vigil, applying warm compresses and monitoring her breathing. After what seemed like hours, Olivia's eyes finally opened, confusion and fear evident in their amber depths. "Where?" Her voice was barely audible, cracked from cold and dehydration. "My ranch," Gideon answered. "Outside La Junta, you're safe now." She tried to sit up but lacked the strength. Gideon gently restrained her with a hand on her shoulder. "Don't move yet. You nearly froze to death out there." Her eyes, now more focused, studied his face with apprehension. "Who?" "Gideon Zimmerman." He expected a flash of recognition, a hint of fear at his notorious name, but there was none. Either she was too disoriented to make the connection, or his reputation hadn't reached Boston. "Olivia Hayes," she whispered. "I know. Sheriff sent me to find you." He reached for a cup of warm broth Eduardo had left. "Can you drink?" She nodded weakly, and Gideon supported her head as she sipped the liquid. After a few swallows, her eyes drifted closed again, exhaustion claiming her. Gideon carefully lifted her from the rug and carried her upstairs to the prepared guest room. As he laid her on the bed and pulled the quilts up to her chin, he was struck by how vulnerable she looked and how long it had been since he'd allowed anyone vulnerable into his home. "What am I doing?" He muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair. This woman was trouble he didn't need. Once she was stable, he'd send her to town, to the doctor, and be done with this unexpected responsibility. Yet as he turned to leave, Olivia's hand suddenly caught his, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so weak. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes briefly opening again, "for finding me." Something shifted in Gideon's chest, something he'd thought long dead and buried. He gently extracted his hand from hers. "Rest," he said gruffly, retreating from the room and the unfamiliar feelings stirring within him. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having passed during the night, leaving a pristine white landscape in its wake. Gideon had slept little, checking on his unexpected guest several times throughout the night. Each time, he found her sleeping soundly, her breathing stronger, her skin warmer to the touch. He was in the kitchen preparing coffee when he heard a soft noise behind him. Turning, he found Olivia standing in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket over the clean shirt, and pants Eduardo's wife had left behind clothes far too large for her petite frame. "You shouldn't be up," Gideon said, surprised by her resilience. "I've imposed on your hospitality enough," she replied, her voice stronger than the previous night. "I need to get to La Junta." Gideon assessed her critically. The frostbite on her cheeks and nose had formed small blisters, and she was clearly unsteady on her feet, one hand gripping the doorframe for support. "You're not going anywhere today," he said firmly. "Doctor needs to look at those frostbitten areas and you're barely standing." Olivia straightened, pride evident in her posture despite her condition. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Zimmerman, but I have urgent business in town." "Whatever business you have can wait another day," Gideon replied, pouring coffee into a mug and holding it out to her. "Roads are still nearly impassable and you need rest." She hesitated, then accepted the coffee, wincing slightly as the hot mug touched her tender fingers. "The stagecoach, the other passengers, driver and guard didn't make it," Gideon said bluntly. "Bandits got them before the storm." "You were the only passenger, far as we know." Olivia closed her eyes briefly, absorbing this news. "They were kind men. The driver gave me his coat when mine proved inadequate. That explained the oversized garment she'd been wearing." Gideon nodded, a new respect forming for the woman before him. She'd had the presence of mind to take what she needed to survive, then struck out on her own rather than waiting to be found. "Sit before you fall," he said, gesturing to a chair at the small kitchen table. "Eduardo's making breakfast." Olivia complied, sinking gratefully into the chair. In the morning light streaming through the windows, Gideon could better see her features. Despite the frostbite and exhaustion, she was undeniably beautiful, with high cheekbones and expressive eyes. Her dark brown hair, now dry, fell in loose waves past her shoulders. "You saved my life," she said suddenly, looking up at him. "I remember bits and pieces, you carrying me, warming my hands." A flush that had nothing to do with frostbite colored her cheeks. "I'm indebted to you." Gideon shifted uncomfortably. "Sheriff asked me to look." "Anyone would have done the same." "We both know that's not true," Olivia replied with surprising insight. "Especially in weather like that. You risked your life for a stranger." Before Gideon could respond, Eduardo entered with a platter of food, eggs, bacon, and freshly baked biscuits. The older Mexican man smiled warmly at Olivia. "Ah, the señorita is awake. This is good, very good. You must eat, build strength." He set the platter down and introduced himself. "I am Eduardo Mendoza, foreman for Mr. Zimmerman these 10 years. "Olivia Hayes," she replied with a genuine smile that transformed her face, momentarily distracting Gideon. "It smells wonderful, Mr. Mendoza." "Just Eduardo, please," he gestured to the food. "Eat now, both of you." As they ate, Gideon observed Olivia surreptitiously. She had manners that spoke of good breeding, but there was something practical and unpretentious about her that didn't match his image of Eastern socialites. "What brings you to La Junta?" he finally asked. "Not exactly a destination for Boston society." Olivia's expression became guarded. "I'm to take a position as the new schoolteacher." Gideon raised an eyebrow. La Junta had been trying to establish a proper school for years. The last teacher, a stern older woman from Philadelphia, had lasted precisely 3 months before declaring the children uncivilized and returning east. "Long way from Boston for a teaching position," he remarked. "I wanted a fresh start," she replied simply, though something in her tone suggested there was more to the story. "Well, the town will be glad to have you," Gideon said. "Assuming you don't change your mind once you see what you're getting into." A flash of determination crossed her face. "I'm not one to abandon commitments, Mr. Zimmerman, regardless of challenges." "Gideon," he corrected. After saving her life and bringing her into his home, formality seemed unnecessary. "Gideon," she repeated, and somehow his name sounded different on her lips. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Gideon rose, hand instinctively moving to his gun belt before remembering he'd left it hanging by the door. He moved to the window and relaxed slightly upon recognizing Sheriff Miller's distinctive bay gelding. "Sheriff's here," he announced. "Probably worried I left your body for the wolves." Olivia looked startled. Why would he think that? Gideon merely shrugged and went to the door, leaving Olivia to wonder about the kind of man who had saved her. Sheriff Miller dismounted, accompanied by Doc Peterson, an aging physician who'd patched up more bullet wounds than Gideon cared to remember, including 2 of his own. "Zimmerman," Miller greeted cautiously. "Eduardo's message said you found her alive." "See for yourself," Gideon replied, stepping aside to allow the men entry. The sheriff's relief was palpable when he saw Olivia sitting at the kitchen table. Doc Peterson immediately moved to her side, professional concern etched on his weathered face. "Miss Hayes, I presume? I'm Dr. Peterson." "May I?" He gestured to her face and hands, clearly noting the frostbite. Olivia nodded, submitting to his examination while the sheriff turned to Gideon. "Didn't think you'd actually find her, let alone bring her back alive," Miller admitted quietly. "Town's buzzing about it already." Gideon frowned. "I did what you asked. Now she's your responsibility." Miller studied him thoughtfully. "Never known you to play nurse, Zimmerman. Must be getting soft in your old age." "Watch it, Miller," Gideon warned, though without his usual menace. Across the room, Doc Peterson was applying a salve to Olivia's frostbitten areas. "You're lucky, Miss Hayes. Another few hours out there, and we'd be treating much worse than this. Mr. Zimmerman's quick action saved your fingers and toes at the very least." "I'm most grateful," Olivia replied, her eyes finding Gideon's across the room. Something unspoken passed between them, causing Gideon to look away first. "We should get her to town," the sheriff suggested. "The boarding house is prepared for her arrival." "Not today," Doc Peterson interjected. "This young lady needs rest, not a bumpy wagon ride. The frostbite needs monitoring, and she's still recovering from exposure." He turned to Gideon. If you're willing to host her another day or two, it would be medically advisable. Gideon hesitated, torn between wanting to return to his solitude and an unexpected reluctance to see Olivia leave. Before he could respond, Eduardo spoke up. Of course she can stay. My wife returns tomorrow. She can help the señorita with anything she needs. Gideon shot his foreman a look but nodded. Fine. She can stay until Doc says she's fit to travel. That's settled then, Doc Peterson said, packing up his bag. I'll leave this salve. Apply it 3 times daily to the affected areas. Keep warm, rest, and eat well, Miss Hayes. I'll return in 2 days to check your progress. After providing more detailed instructions, the doctor and sheriff prepared to leave. Sheriff Miller paused at the door, looking back at Gideon. Town council's meeting tomorrow about the school, since Miss Hayes is delayed. They'll want to know when to expect her. I can be ready within a week, Olivia interjected, standing carefully. Please assure them I'm committed to starting as soon as possible. Miller tipped his hat. I'll relay the message, madam. And may I say, we're all mighty relieved you survived your ordeal. After they departed, an awkward silence fell between Gideon and Olivia. Eduardo tactfully excused himself to tend to the horses, leaving them alone. You don't have to keep me here, Olivia said finally. I understand if it's an imposition. It's fine, Gideon replied gruffly. Doctor's orders. Olivia smiled slightly. You don't strike me as a man who typically follows orders. Despite himself, Gideon felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Depends who's giving them. The rest of the day passed quietly. Olivia rested, alternating between sleeping and sitting by the fire with a book from Gideon's surprisingly well-stocked shelves. He caught her examining his collection with obvious appreciation titles ranging from practical manuals on ranching to classics of literature and philosophy. Surprised, he asked, finding her running her fingers along the spines. A little, she admitted. Though I'm learning not to make assumptions about you, Mr. Gideon. He busied himself stoking the fire. People see what they expect to see. And what do they expect to see when they look at you? She asked perceptively. Gideon turned, studying her. Most people would never dare ask such a direct question. A killer, he said bluntly. 7 notches on my gun belt, that's all most care to know. To his surprise, Olivia didn't flinch. And is that all there is to know? Isn't it enough? He maintained a neutral expression, though her calm response to his revelation intrigued him. I'm alive because you risked your life to find me, she said simply. That seems equally important to know about a man. Gideon had no response to that. He excused himself to check the livestock, needing distance from the woman who seemed to see through his carefully constructed barriers. That evening, they shared a simple dinner prepared by Eduardo before he left for his own cabin on the property. As they ate, Olivia gradually drew Gideon into conversation, asking about his ranch, his horses, the territory. He found himself talking more than he had in years, somehow unable to maintain his usual taciturn demeanor in her presence. You're good at this, he observed finally. At what? She looked genuinely puzzled. Getting people to talk, useful skill for a teacher, I suppose. Olivia smiled. I've always found people interesting. Everyone has a story worth hearing. Even notorious gunfighters, he challenged. Especially them, she replied without hesitation. Though I suspect your reputation exceeds the reality. Gideon leaned back in his chair. What makes you think that? Your books, she gestured toward the shelves. Your gentle handling of my frostbite, the respect your foreman shows you not fear but genuine regard, she shrugged. These things tell a different story than town gossip. Her perception was unsettling. Gideon stood, clearing the plates to give himself something to do. You should rest. Doctor's orders, remember? Olivia recognized the dismissal and rose. Thank you for dinner and for everything else. She hesitated, then added softly, Good night, Gideon. He watched her ascend the stairs, her movements still slightly stiff from her ordeal but growing stronger. Something about her presence in his home, in his life, felt both intrusive and strangely right, a contradiction he wasn't prepared to examine too closely. Good night, Olivia, he murmured once she was out of earshot. The next morning brought another clear, cold day and the arrival of Eduardo's wife, Maria, a robust woman with a kind face and efficient manner. She took one look at Olivia, and immediately set about properly caring for her, clucking disapprovingly at Gideon's bachelor accommodations. "Men know nothing of comfort," she declared, arranging extra pillows behind Olivia and presenting her with a cup of herbal tea. "This will help with strength, señorita. My grandmother's recipe." Olivia accepted the attention graciously, though Gideon noted a flash of amusement in her eyes at Maria's fussing. He used the distraction to escape to the stables, where work awaited that didn't involve complicated feelings about his unexpected guest. He spent the day mending fences damaged in the storm, checking on his cattle, and exercising horses too long confined by the weather. Physical labor had always cleared his mind, but today thoughts of Olivia persistently intruded her smile, her perceptiveness, the way she didn't cower at his reputation. By late afternoon, Gideon returned to the house, muscles aching pleasantly from honest work. He found Olivia in the kitchen with Maria, helping to prepare dinner despite the older woman's protests. "My hands need to move," Olivia was insisting as she carefully chopped vegetables. "Besides, I'm feeling much better today." She did look better, Gideon noted. Color had returned to her cheeks, and though the frost-beaten areas were still red and blistered, her overall appearance was vastly improved from the half-frozen woman he'd found in the snow. "Should you be up?" he asked from the doorway. Both women turned. Maria looked exasperated, but Olivia smiled. "Dr. Peterson said movement would be good as long as I don't overexert myself," she explained. "And I wanted to contribute something after all your hospitality." Maria shook her head. "I told her guests do not cook, but she is stubborn this one." "I've noticed," Gideon said dryly, earning a challenging look from Olivia that, unexpectedly, made him want to smile. Dinner that night was livelier than any meal in Gideon's house in recent memory. Eduardo and Maria's warm presence, combined with Olivia's natural ability to draw people out, created an atmosphere almost like a family gathering, something Gideon hadn't experienced since before the war. After the meal, Eduardo suggested a game of cards, and to everyone's surprise, Gideon agreed. They played several hands of poker, using matches instead of money. Olivia proved to be surprisingly skilled, her expression giving away nothing as she consistently won hand after hand. Where did a Boston schoolteacher learn to play poker like that? Gideon finally asked as she collected her winnings from another round. A shadow briefly crossed her face. "My father taught me. He believed in unconventional education." Something in her tone suggested there was more to the story, but Gideon didn't press. Everyone had secrets, he understood that better than most. The evening ended when Olivia, despite her protests that she felt fine, began to show signs of fatigue. Maria firmly declared it was time for rest, and Gideon found himself walking Olivia to the base of the stairs. "Thank you for a lovely evening," she said. "I haven't enjoyed myself so much in a long time." "It was just poker," Gideon replied, though he'd enjoyed himself too more than he cared to admit. "It was more than that," Olivia said softly. "It was belonging, even if just for an evening." She hesitated, then impulsively reached out to touch his arm. "You have a good home here, Gideon. A good life." The unexpected contact sent warmth through him that had nothing to do with the crackling fire. "Sleep well, Olivia," he managed, acutely aware of her hand still resting on his arm. She smiled and ascended the stairs, leaving Gideon to wonder how this woman had so quickly penetrated the defenses he'd spent years building. The next morning, Doc Peterson returned as promised to examine Olivia. Gideon waited impatiently in his study, pretending to review ranch accounts while actually listening for the verdict. Finally, the door opened, and the doctor entered, looking pleased. "She's healing remarkably well," he announced. "The frostbite is responding to treatment, and her strength has returned impressively quickly. She's a resilient young woman." "So she can travel to town?" Gideon asked, ignoring the twinge of disappointment the question evoked. "I see no reason why not, if you're eager to be rid of her," Doc Peterson replied, giving Gideon a shrewd look. "I'm not," Gideon began defensively, then stopped. "My responsibility was to find her, not nurse her indefinitely." The doctor hummed noncommittally. "Well, she's well enough to relocate to the boarding house. I'll arrange transportation for tomorrow morning, unless you'd prefer to take her yourself," The question hung in the air. Gideon realized with some surprise that he did want to take her to extend their time together just a little longer. "I'll take her," he said finally. "Need to go to town anyway." Doc Peterson nodded, a knowing glint in his eye that Gideon chose to ignore. After the doctor departed, Gideon found Olivia in the small sitting room, gazing out the window at the snow-covered landscape. "Doc says you're fit to travel," he said, leaning against the doorframe. She turned, and Gideon was struck again by how beautiful she was, even with the healing frostbite marring her features. "Yes, he told me. I'll be ready to leave tomorrow." "I'll take you," Gideon offered. "Need to pick up supplies anyway," Olivia smiled. "Thank you, I appreciate everything you've done." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with things neither seemed ready to say. "I should pack my things," she said finally. "Not that I have much left after the stagecoach robbery." "Maria found some clothes that might fit you better," Gideon said. "From when their daughter visited last summer," Olivia nodded gratefully. "Everyone has been so kind." "It's nothing," Gideon replied gruffly, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just folks helping when needed." "Not everyone would have ridden out in a blizzard to search for a stranger," Olivia pointed out. "I owe you my life, Gideon, I won't forget that." Her sincere words made him even more uncomfortable. "You would have done the same," he said dismissively. "I hope I would have," she replied thoughtfully. "But it takes a special kind of courage to risk your life for someone you've never met." Gideon changed the subject. "Town's eager for their new teacher. School building's not much, but they've been fixing it up since they got word you were coming." Olivia's expression brightened. "I'm eager to begin. How many children are there in La Junta?" "About 30 of school age," Gideon replied. "Mix of ranch kids, townspeople's children, a few from the nearby farms. Some have never had proper schooling." "A challenge I look forward to," Olivia said, determination evident in her voice. Gideon studied her with newfound respect. "Most Eastern women would find this territory too rough, too primitive." "Perhaps I'm not like most Eastern women," she replied with a slight smile. "I'm beginning to see that," Gideon admitted. Their final evening at the ranch passed pleasantly. Maria prepared a special dinner to mark Olivia's departure, and even Eduardo commented on how the house had come alive with her presence. Gideon remained quieter than usual, wrestling with emotions he'd thought long dead and dreading the return to solitude that tomorrow would bring. Later, as the household prepared for bed, Gideon found himself alone with Olivia by the fireplace. She was gazing into the flames, her expression pensive. "Having second thoughts about staying in La Junta?" he asked. She looked up, surprised. "No, why would you think that?" Gideon shrugged. "Most people who come here from back east don't last the winter." "I'm not most people," Olivia replied with quiet confidence, "and I have nowhere else to go." The statement hung in the air, revealing more than perhaps she'd intended. Gideon recognized the look of someone running from something or someone. "Trouble in Boston?" he asked carefully. Olivia hesitated, then nodded slowly. "My father died 6 months ago. Gambling debts." "The creditors took everything." Her fingers twisted in her lap. "A family friend arranged this position. A fresh start, far from complications." "What kind of complications?" Gideon pressed, sensing there was more to her story. Olivia met his gaze directly. "The kind that involve a jilted fiancé who was more interested in my father's supposed fortune than in me. When the debts came to light, Edward," she stopped abruptly. "Let's just say his true character emerged." Anger flickered through Gideon at the thought of someone hurting her. "He harmed you." "Not physically," Olivia clarified, "but his cruelty was educational. I learned how quickly affection can turn to contempt." She smiled sadly. "A valuable lesson, if painful." Gideon understood pain as a teacher all too well. Some lessons leave deeper scars than others. "Yes," Olivia agreed, studying him. "I think you understand that better than most." Their eyes held for a long moment, a connection forming based on shared understanding of loss and reinvention. "It's getting late," Gideon finally said, breaking the spell. "We should leave early tomorrow." "Roads will still be rough." Olivia nodded and rose gracefully. "Good night, Gideon, and thank you for listening." "Good night, Olivia," he replied softly, watching as she ascended the stairs for what would be the last time. The morning dawned clear, but cold as Gideon hitched his best horses to the wagon. He'd insisted on using the enclosed wagon rather than an open one, concerned about exposing Olivia to the elements so soon after her ordeal. Maria had packed a basket of food and extra blankets, fussing over Olivia like a mother hen. "You come visit us, señorita," Maria insisted as they prepared to depart. "Don't be a stranger now." "I'd like that," Olivia replied, embracing the older woman warmly. "Thank you for everything." Eduardo shook her hand, then surprised her with a quick paternal hug. "La Junta is gaining a fine teacher. Our loss is the town's gain." Gideon watched these farewells with mixed emotions. In just a few days, Olivia had charmed his household completely, himself included, though he was reluctant to admit it. The journey to town took longer than usual due to the snow-covered roads. Inside the wagon, wrapped in blankets against the cold, Olivia and Gideon sat side by side, the closeness both comforting and unsettling. "Will you come into town often?" Olivia asked as the wagon bumped along. "Not if I can help it," Gideon replied honestly. "Prefer to keep to myself." "Because of your reputation," she pressed gently. Gideon glanced at her. "People have long memories, especially for the bad things." "What happened?" Olivia asked. To make them fear you so. For a moment, Gideon considered deflecting the question as he always did. But something about Olivia's genuine interest, free of judgment, made him answer truthfully. "War changes a man," he began slowly. "I came back, different, harder, got into some trouble, then more trouble." He stared ahead at the snow-covered road. 7 men tried to kill me over the years. 7 men didn't live to regret it. Self-defense, then, Olivia observed. The law saw it that way, Gideon agreed. Folks' opinions varied. Last one was the brother of a man I'd killed fair in a previous fight. Came at me in the saloon, drunk, waving his daddy's old army revolver. I was faster. He paused. He was just 19. Olivia was quiet for a moment. "That must weigh on you." "Every day," Gideon admitted, surprised at his own candor. "Is that why you live so far from town? To avoid more incidents?" Gideon nodded. "And because of Eliza." "Eliza?" Olivia asked softly. Gideon hadn't spoken the name aloud to anyone but Sheriff Miller in years. Yet somehow, telling Olivia felt right, like lancing a wound that had festered too long. "My wife," he said finally. "She died 12 years ago, childbirth, baby too." Olivia's hand found his, her touch warm and comforting. "I'm so sorry, Gideon." He didn't pull away as he might have expected. "Town doctor was drunk, couldn't get another in time. After I couldn't stay in town, too many memories." He took a deep breath. "Built the ranch, kept to myself." "And became the notorious Gideon Zimmerman," Olivia concluded gently. "Easier for people to fear you than pity you," he replied. They rode in silence for a while, her hand still resting on his, a simple gesture of comfort that meant more than he could express. As they approached La Junta, Gideon felt an increasing reluctance to complete the journey. Once they reached town, Olivia would begin her new life, and he would return to his solitude, a solitude that suddenly seemed less appealing than it had a week ago. The town came into view, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a main street, with houses and businesses branching off in neat rows. Despite its relatively small size, La Junta was prospering, the railroad having brought growth and opportunity to the once tiny settlement. People stopped to stare as Gideon drove the wagon down the main street, partly because of his own rare appearance in town, but mostly because word had spread about the beautiful new schoolteacher who had nearly died in the blizzard, only to be rescued by the notorious gunfighter. Gideon pulled up in front of the boarding house, a well-maintained 2-story building run by the widow Simmons, known for her strict rules and excellent cooking. Before he could descend to help Olivia, the door opened and a small welcoming committee emerged, led by Sheriff Miller and Mrs. Simmons herself. "Miss Hayes," Mrs. Simmons called, hurrying forward. "We've been so worried. Thank the Lord you're safe." Gideon helped Olivia down from the wagon, conscious of the curious stares from townspeople who had gathered to witness her arrival. She stood straight and dignified despite her still healing frostbite, offering a warm smile to her greeters. "Thank you for your concern," she said. "I'm very fortunate that Mr. Zimmerman found me when he did." All eyes turned briefly to Gideon, who shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. Sheriff Miller stepped forward, extending his hand. "Town owes you a debt, Zimmerman," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "We won't forget it." Gideon shook the offered hand briefly, nodding once. Just did what needed doing. A distinguished-looking older man pushed through the small crowd. "Miss Hayes, I'm Jonathan Porter, head of the town council. We're delighted you've arrived safely and look forward to you taking up your teaching duties." "Thank you, Mr. Porter," Olivia replied. "I'm eager to begin as soon as possible." "The school is nearly ready," Porter assured her. "Perhaps next Monday. Give you time to recover fully and settle in." "That would be perfect," Olivia agreed. Mrs. Simmons took charge then, insisting that Olivia needed rest and refreshment after her journey. As the older woman led Olivia toward the boarding house, Olivia glanced back at Gideon, their eyes meeting in a silent exchange. "I'll have your things sent up," he called, suddenly awkward in the face of their parting. Olivia nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "Thank you again, Gideon." "For everything." Then she was gone, disappearing into the boarding house, leaving Gideon standing beside his wagon, already feeling the loss of her presence. Sheriff Miller approached again, more privately this time. "Never thought I'd see the day," he remarked cryptically. "What day is that?" Gideon asked, his voice gruff. "The day Gideon Zimmerman looked at a woman the way you just looked at her." Miller's expression was knowing. "Not since Eliza," Gideon scowled. "Don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't," Miller replied, clearly unconvinced. "You planning to stick around town for a while? Got supplies to pick up," Gideon said shortly. "Then heading back to the ranch." The sheriff nodded, though his eyes held a challenge. "School dedications on Sunday, whole town will be there, including Miss Hayes." Gideon busied himself adjusting the harness on his horses. "Got ranch work to do." "Always do," Miller agreed easily. "Just thought you might want to see how she's settling in, being as you saved her life and all." With that, the sheriff tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Gideon to his thoughts increasingly dominated by a pair of amber eyes, and the woman who had, against all odds, begun to thaw something long frozen within him. The next few days passed slowly for Gideon. He threw himself into ranch work, rising before dawn and collapsing exhausted into bed after dark. Eduardo noticed his restlessness but wisely said nothing, though Maria was less circumspect. "You miss her," she stated plainly on the third evening as she set dinner before him. "The señorita brought light to this house. She's where she belongs," Gideon replied gruffly, "doing what she came to do." Maria clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "And you belong alone in this big house, I suppose. Bah, men are fools." Gideon couldn't entirely disagree with her assessment. He found himself thinking of Olivia, constantly wondering how she was adapting to town life, if the frostbite was healing properly, if she was preparing for her first day of teaching. Several times, he nearly saddled Thunder to ride into town, only to talk himself out of it. What would be the point? She had her new life to build, and he had his solitude. That's how it had been, how it should remain. Yet when Sunday morning arrived, Gideon found himself shaving carefully, donning his rarely worn good suit and hitching the horses to the wagon. Going to town for the school dedication. Eduardo asked, failing to hide his smile. "Need supplies," Gideon muttered. "Of course," Eduardo replied, exchanging a knowing look with his wife. "Many supplies are needed on Sundays when the stores are closed." Gideon ignored the comment and set off, telling himself he was merely being sociable, something the sheriff was always encouraging anyway. It had nothing to do with a certain schoolteacher with amber eyes. The town was buzzing with activity when he arrived. Nearly every resident of La Junta had turned out for the dedication of the newly renovated schoolhouse, a simple but sturdy building at the edge of town. Children ran about excitedly, families gathered in their Sunday best, and at the center of it all stood Olivia, radiant in a deep blue dress that brought out the warmth in her eyes. Gideon remained at the periphery of the crowd, watching as she greeted parents and children with natural ease and charm. The frostbite on her face had faded considerably, and though still visible, it did nothing to diminish her beauty. Mayor Porter was making a speech about the importance of education for the future of La Junta, but Gideon barely heard the words. His attention was fixed on Olivia, who stood beside the mayor with dignified poise. Then, as if sensing his presence, she looked up, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found him. The smile that illuminated her face when she spotted him sent an unexpected warmth through Gideon's chest. She gave him a small, private wave, and he nodded in acknowledgement, suddenly glad he had come. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed to tables laden with food for the community celebration, Olivia made her way directly to him. "You came," she said, her pleasure evident. "I didn't think you would. Needed supplies," Gideon replied automatically then, seeing her raised eyebrow, admitted, "and wanted to see how you were settling in." "Very well, thanks to everyone's kindness," Olivia said. "The frostbite is healing nicely, and I'm prepared for classes to begin tomorrow. 28 students registered so far. Town's lucky to have you," Gideon said sincerely. Olivia's expression softened. "Would you join me for some refreshments? Mrs. Johnson's apple pie is apparently legendary." Before Gideon could respond, a well-dressed man approached, inserting himself a bit too confidently between them. "Miss Hayes, the mayor is asking for you, something about the school schedule." "Thank you, Mr. Baldwin," Olivia replied, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "I'll be there momentarily." She turned back to Gideon. "Thomas Baldwin, our local banker, he's been extremely attentive since my arrival." Gideon immediately disliked the way Baldwin looked at Olivia with the proprietary gaze of a man who considered himself entitled to the most desirable woman in town. "Don't let me keep you," Gideon said, taking a step back. "Will you wait?" Olivia asked quickly. "I'd like to speak with you properly." Her obvious desire for his company overrode his instinct to retreat. "I'll be here." As Olivia moved away with the banker, who placed a hand on her elbow with unnecessary familiarity, Sheriff Miller materialized at Gideon's side. "Didn't expect to see you here," the lawman commented. "Apparently that's the sentiment of the day," Gideon replied dryly. Miller chuckled. "Baldwin's been circling Miss Hayes like a vulture since she got to town. Brought her flowers every day, offered to show her around at every opportunity." Gideon felt an unexpected surge of jealousy. "She could do worse than a banker," he said stiffly. "Could do better, too," Miller replied pointedly. "Baldwin's got money, but he's got a reputation with ladies that isn't entirely gentlemanly, been divorced twice already." Gideon's jaw tightened as he watched Baldwin lean too close to Olivia while she spoke with the mayor. "Not my concern," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Of course not," Miller agreed with evident sarcasm. "Just thought you should know, being as you saved her life and all." Before Gideon could respond, Olivia returned, having apparently extricated herself from Baldwin's attention. "Sorry about that," she said. "Now, about that legendary apple pie," Miller tipped his hat. "I'll leave you two to it. Good to see you in town, Zimmerman. Should happen more often." As the sheriff walked away, Olivia led Gideon toward the refreshment tables, where they filled plates with Mrs. Johnson's famous pie and found a relatively quiet spot away from the main crowd. "How's the boarding house?" Gideon asked, searching for safe conversation. "Comfortable if a bit restrictive," Olivia replied. "Mrs. Simmons runs a tight ship. No male visitors above the first floor, strict curfews, and daily inspections of our rooms." "Sounds like prison," Gideon remarked. Olivia laughed, the sound musical and unrestrained. "Not quite that bad." "But I do miss the freedom of your ranch, and Maria's cooking." "She misses you," Gideon said, then added more quietly, "The house seems quieter without you there." Olivia's eyes softened. "I miss it too, more than I expected." Their gaze held for a moment too long to be casual, and Gideon found himself fighting the urge to reach for her hand. The moment was broken by Baldwin's reappearance. "Miss Hayes, they're waiting for you to cut the ribbon on the school door," he announced, his voice carrying a note of authority that grated on Gideon. Baldwin glanced dismissively at Gideon. "Zimmerman." "Baldwin," Gideon returned coolly. Olivia looked apologetically at Gideon. "Duty calls, it seems. Will you stay for the rest of the celebration? Got to get back to the ranch," Gideon replied, suddenly eager to escape the town and its social complications. "Cattle don't feed themselves." Disappointment flickered across Olivia's face. "Of course, I understand." She hesitated, then added, "I hope you'll visit again soon. Perhaps I could come to the ranch sometime." To thank Maria and Eduardo properly, Baldwin's expression darkened at this suggestion, but Gideon barely noticed, focused entirely on Olivia's unexpected invitation. "You'd be welcome," he said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. "Anytime." Olivia smiled warmly. "I'll hold you to that." She turned to Baldwin. "Shall we proceed with the ribbon cutting, Mr. Baldwin?" As they walked away, Gideon found himself watching her, the graceful way she moved, the strength and dignity in her bearing. Something was happening to him, something he hadn't experienced in 12 long years, and it terrified him. The following weeks brought a rhythm to life in and around La Junta. Olivia threw herself into teaching with passion and determination, quickly earning the respect of both students and parents. News of her innovative methods and genuine care for her pupils spread throughout the area, and soon children from outlying ranches were making the daily journey to attend her classes. Gideon, meanwhile, kept to his ranch, only venturing into town when absolutely necessary. On these rare visits, he found himself unconsciously looking for glimpses of Olivia, sometimes spotting her leading her students on nature walks, or hurrying between the school and boarding house with arms full of books and papers. Twice, they encountered each other briefly on the street. Each time, Olivia's face lit up with genuine pleasure at seeing him, and each time, Gideon felt something within him stir to life, something he'd thought long dead. "You should call on her properly," Maria suggested one evening as she served dinner. "Not just these chance meetings in town." Gideon scowled at his plate. "She's busy with her teaching. Besides, Banker Baldwin seems to have staked his claim." Maria snorted derisively. "That one all shine, no substance. The señorita is too smart for him." "Not my business either way," Gideon insisted, though the thought of Olivia with Baldwin made his jaw clench. "Stubborn as a mule," Maria muttered, retreating to the kitchen. The truth was, Gideon couldn't stop thinking about Olivia. At night, he would recall the way she'd looked at him, not with fear but with understanding. The way she'd spoken his name as if it weren't attached to a notorious reputation. The way her hand had felt in his, warm and trusting. Yet he kept his distance, convinced that a woman like Olivia, educated, refined, with her whole future ahead of her, deserved better than a scarred, aging gunfighter with blood on his hands. Then, nearly a month after the school dedication, Eduardo burst into the barn where Gideon was mending tack. "Rider coming," he announced. A woman, alone. Gideon stepped outside, shading his eyes against the bright March sun. The figure approaching on horseback was unmistakable, even at a distance. Olivia, riding with surprising skill for an Eastern woman, her dark hair loose and flowing behind her. "What the hell is she doing out here alone?" Gideon muttered, concern and pleasure warring within him. "Perhaps she took you at your word," Eduardo replied with a smile, "that she would be welcome anytime." Gideon shot his foreman a look but moved to meet Olivia as she approached the ranch house. She reined in her horse, a gentle mare Gideon recognized from the town livery, and smiled down at him. "Good afternoon, Gideon," she greeted him, slightly breathless from her ride. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," he replied, reaching up to help her dismount. His hands lingered briefly at her waist as he set her on the ground. "Though it's not safe for a woman to ride alone in these parts. I'm developing quite a reputation for recklessness, it seems," Olivia said with a small laugh. "First nearly freezing to death, now riding unchaperoned to a bachelor's ranch. Mrs. Simmons will have apoplexy when she finds out." "Does she know you're here?" Gideon asked, leading her horse toward the water trough. "I told her I was visiting a student's family," Olivia admitted. "Not entirely a lie, as I do have 2 students living on a ranch in this general direction." Gideon raised an eyebrow. "Deliberate deception from the town's moral example. Sometimes rules deserve questioning," she replied with a hint of defiance. "Especially rules that exist solely to constrain women's independence." The passionate statement reminded Gideon that there was much more to Olivia Hayes than her gentle demeanor, suggested a strength and conviction that continued to intrigue him. "Maria will be delighted to see you," he said, changing the subject. "She's been complaining the house lacks a feminine touch." As predicted, Maria's joy at Olivia's unexpected visit was effusive. She immediately insisted that Olivia stay for dinner, setting Eduardo to fetch their best wine from the cellar, and launching into preparation of special dishes. While Maria cooked, Gideon gave Olivia a tour of the ranch, the stables with his prized horses, the cattle pens, the small but productive garden Maria tended, and finally, the overlook behind the house that provided a stunning view of the valley below. "It's beautiful," Olivia said, gazing out at the landscape bathed in late afternoon sunlight. "Peaceful. I can see why you prefer it to town." "Town has its advantages," Gideon replied. "Fewer fences to mend, more company." "Do you ever get lonely out here?" she asked, glancing at him. Gideon considered the question honestly. Used to think solitude was what I wanted, what I deserved. And now, he hesitated, turning to face her directly. "Now I'm not so sure." The air between them seemed to charge with unspoken feelings. Olivia took a small step closer. "I've missed you, Gideon," she said softly, "more than is probably proper for me to admit." The simple honesty of her statement broke through his carefully maintained reserve. "I've missed you too," he confessed. "Thought about riding into town a dozen times, but what?" She pressed when he fell silent. "But you have a new life there," he finished. "A respectable position. Being seen with me wouldn't help your standing in the community." Olivia's eyes flashed with sudden anger. "Do you think I care about that? That I would value town gossip over?" She stopped abruptly, color rising in her cheeks. "Over what?" Gideon asked, stepping closer, close enough to catch the subtle scent of lavender that seemed to follow her. "Over my own feelings," she finished quietly. "Over what I know to be true about you, rather than what others say." Gideon reached out, tentatively brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And what do you know to be true, Olivia?" "That you are a good man," she replied without hesitation. "A man who rode into a blizzard to save a stranger. A man who treated me with respect and kindness when I was at my most vulnerable. A man who loves his home and the people who depend on him." Her eyes held his steadily. "A man I've come to care for deeply." The admission hung between them, honest and unadorned. Gideon stood frozen, overwhelmed by emotions he'd thought himself incapable of feeling again: desire, tenderness, and a terrifying, exhilarating hope. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down. Olivia rose to meet him, and their lips touched in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with the release of long, restrained feelings. Her arms wound around his neck as his hands found her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to feel this way again," he admitted softly. "Never thought I deserved to." "Everyone deserves happiness, Gideon," Olivia whispered, "even notorious gunslingers." The moment was interrupted by Eduardo's distant call announcing that dinner was ready. They separated reluctantly, though Gideon kept hold of Olivia's hand as they walked back to the house. Dinner was a joyous affair, with Maria outdoing herself with special dishes and Eduardo opening his prized bottle of Spanish wine. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and shared stories. Watching Olivia across the table, animated and beautiful in the lamplight, Gideon felt something profound shifting within him, the ice around his heart continuing to thaw, revealing possibilities he'd long since abandoned. All too soon, however, the reality of propriety intruded. "I should return to town before it gets too dark," Olivia said reluctantly. "Mrs. Simmons locks the doors at 9. "I'll ride with you," Gideon said immediately, not safe otherwise. As they prepared to leave, Maria pulled Olivia into a warm embrace. "You come back soon, yes? The house needs your light." "I'd like that very much," Olivia replied, returning the hug. The ride back to La Junta was peaceful, the setting sun casting long shadows across the land. They rode side by side, talking easily about Olivia's students, Gideon's horses, and 100 other topics that seemed to flow naturally between them. As they approached town, however, Gideon grew quieter, aware that they were returning to a world of social constraints and expectations, a world where a notorious gunfighter and a respectable schoolteacher made an unlikely pair. "Penny for your thoughts," Olivia said, noting his change in demeanor. "Wondering what happens next," Gideon admitted. "Between us." Olivia guided her horse closer to his. "What would you like to happen? The directness of her question took him aback. Women in his experience were rarely so forthright about matters of the heart. But then, Olivia Hayes had already proven herself exceptional in countless ways. "I'd like to court you properly," he said finally, "if you'd allow it, though it might complicate your standing in town. I care far more about being true to myself than conforming to the town's expectations," Olivia replied firmly. "And the truth is, Gideon Zimmerman, that I'm falling in love with you." The words, spoken so openly, left Gideon momentarily speechless. When he found his voice again, it was rough with emotion. "I never thought I'd hear words like that again. Never thought I'd feel this way about anyone after Eliza." "I'm not asking you to forget her," Olivia said gently. "She'll always be part of who you are. But perhaps there's room in your heart for new love as well." Gideon reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "There is," he said simply. "You've made room." They continued to the edge of town, where Gideon reluctantly released her hand. "Better if I don't ride all the way to the boarding house with you," he said. "Would start too many tongues wagging." Olivia nodded, though disappointment flashed in her eyes. "When will I see you again?" "Soon," Gideon promised. "Very soon." She smiled, a smile that warmed him to his core. "I'll hold you to that, Mr. Zimmerman." As he watched her ride the remaining distance into town, Gideon felt lighter than he had in years, as if a burden he'd carried for so long had finally begun to lift. For the first time since Eliza's death, he found himself looking forward rather than backward, seeing a future that might hold more than solitude and regret. The following weeks brought a gradual transformation to Gideon's life. He began making regular trips into town, ostensibly for supplies but primarily to see Olivia. They established a pattern of accidental meetings at the general store, the town's small library, or on her walks after school hours. Each encounter deepened their connection, their conversations ranging from literature to philosophy to their hopes and dreams. Gideon found himself sharing thoughts he'd never articulated to anyone, while Olivia spoke of her ambitions to expand educational opportunities for girls and her desire to someday write educational texts that treated all students as equally capable. Eventually, their relationship became too obvious to hide from the town's observant residents. Reactions were mixed, some approving of the positive change in Gideon's demeanor and behavior, others concerned about the propriety of their schoolteacher associating with a man of his reputation. Thomas Baldwin was particularly vocal in his disapproval, cornering Olivia after church one Sunday while Gideon was speaking with Sheriff Miller. "You're risking your position and reputation," Baldwin warned her, his voice low but intense. "The school board hired a respectable teacher, not a woman who consorts with gunfighters." Olivia's response was cool and composed. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Baldwin, but my personal associations are my own affair. Mr. Zimmerman is a respected rancher who has shown me nothing but courtesy and respect. He's killed 7 men," Baldwin hissed, "and saved at least 1 woman," Olivia countered. "Judge not, Mr. Baldwin, lest ye be judged." The biblical reference silenced the banker temporarily, though his expression remained disapproving as Gideon rejoined them. The tension between the 2 men was palpable, but Gideon merely offered Olivia his arm, which she took with a smile that spoke volumes. As spring progressed into early summer, Gideon began making improvements to his ranch house, fixing the sagging porch, repainting the exterior, ordering new curtains from the mercantile. Maria watched these activities with knowing eyes, but said nothing, simply smiling to herself as she prepared increasingly elaborate meals for Olivia's regular Sunday visits. During one such visit in early June, Gideon led Olivia to the wildflower-covered hillside behind the house, where he'd arranged a picnic blanket and basket. "This is lovely," Olivia exclaimed, settling onto the blanket. "Though Maria will be disappointed we're not eating her Sunday roast." She helped prepare this, Gideon assured her, unpacking an impressive array of food. "And she understands I wanted some privacy for this conversation." Olivia looked at him curiously. "That sounds ominous." Gideon smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his usually stern features. "Not ominous. At least, I hope not. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, clearly purchased during one of his recent trips to the larger town of Pueblo. Olivia's eyes widened as he opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Olivia Hayes," Gideon said, his voice steady despite the nervous pounding of his heart. "I've lived half my life in shadows, punishing myself for the past, convinced I deserved nothing better. Then you appeared, half frozen and entirely unexpected, and brought light back into my world." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes as he continued. "I love you," Gideon said simply. "I want to build a life with you if you'll have me. Will you marry me?" Olivia's smile was radiant through her tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Gideon Zimmerman, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then pulled her into a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. When they finally separated, Olivia laughed softly. "Mrs. Simmons will definitely have that apoplexy now." "We'll need to discuss arrangements," Gideon said, suddenly practical. "Your teaching position, I've already spoken with Mayor Porter," Olivia interrupted. "Hypothetically, of course. Married female teachers are not common, but he assured me that given the shortage of qualified educators in the territory, the town would be foolish to release me over such a matter." Gideon raised an eyebrow. "You were that confident in my proposal." "Hopeful," Olivia corrected with a smile. "And prepared. I believe in addressing potential obstacles before they become problematic." "One of the many reasons I love you," Gideon said, drawing her close again. "Always thinking ahead." They spent the afternoon planning their future, a small wedding later that summer, Olivia continuing to teach while making the ranch her home, renovations to make the house more suitable for a family. "A family," Gideon repeated, the word both terrifying and exhilarating. "After Eliza and the baby." "I never thought I'd have that chance again." Olivia squeezed his hand. "We'll take that journey together, one step at a time." When they announced their engagement that evening to Maria and Eduardo, the couple's joy was uncontained. Maria immediately began listing all the preparations needed for a proper wedding, while Eduardo opened his last bottle of special wine for a toast. "To new beginnings," Eduardo proposed, raising his glass, "and to love that finds us when we least expect it." "To love," Gideon agreed, his eyes never leaving Olivia's. "And to the woman who thawed a frozen heart." News of their engagement spread quickly through La Junta, generating reactions ranging from genuine congratulations to scandalized whispers. Baldwin made a point of resigning from the school board in protest, though his gesture backfired when Mayor Porter publicly thanked him for making room for more progressive voices. Sheriff Miller, upon hearing the news, merely smiled and said, "About damn time." The wedding took place on a perfect July day, with the ceremony held in the town church and the celebration afterward at Gideon's, now Gideon and Olivia's ranch. Nearly the entire town attended, many out of genuine affection for the couple, others out of irrepressible curiosity. Olivia was radiant in a dress of ivory satin, her dark hair adorned with wildflowers gathered by her students, who attended en masse, delighted to see their beloved teacher so happy. Gideon, standing tall and proud in a new suit, looked years younger than he had that winter day in Jack Colton's saloon. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days, those present witnessed something remarkable: the complete transformation of a man once defined by his Notorious passed into someone defined by love and hope for the future. After the celebration, as the last guests departed and twilight settled over the ranch, Gideon and Olivia stood together on the porch of their home. "Happy, Mrs. Zimmerman?" Gideon asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely, Mr. Zimmerman," Olivia replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still can't quite believe how we found each other." "I found you half frozen in the snow," Gideon reminded her with a smile. "Not the most romantic beginning." "I disagree," Olivia said, turning to face him fully. "You saved my life that day, but in many ways I think I saved yours too." Gideon nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. "You thawed more than just your frozen hands by my fire. You thawed a heart I thought would stay cold forever." "And now?" Olivia asked, her eyes reflecting the first stars appearing in the evening sky. "Now," Gideon said, drawing her close. Now we build a life together, day by day, season by season, for all the years we have. For all our years, Olivia agreed, rising on tiptoe to seal their new beginning with a kiss. And as night fell fully over the Colorado landscape, the house that had once stood as a monument to one man's isolation and regret became a home filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a future neither had dared to imagine until fate brought them together in the depths of a winter storm. In the years that followed, the story of how notorious gunfighter Gideon Zimmerman had found a half-frozen Boston schoolteacher in a blizzard became the stuff of local legend, a tale told around fires on cold winter nights. But those who knew them best understood that the real story wasn't about a dramatic rescue. It was about two people who had helped each other heal, finding in each other's arms the home they had both been searching for. 5 years after their wedding, Gideon and Olivia stood together on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching their twin sons, 3-year-old William and Robert, chase each other around the yard under the watchful eye of Maria, who had appointed herself honorary grandmother to the boys. "They grow so fast," Olivia remarked, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly where their third child, a daughter, they believed was due in less than a month. "Too fast," Gideon agreed, his arm around her shoulders. At 37, his hair showed more silver than before, but the hard lines of his face had softened, his eyes more often filled with humor than haunted by the past. The Zimmerman Ranch had prospered, expanding its operations to include some of the finest horses in Colorado territory. Olivia continued teaching, having established a small schoolhouse on their property that served both their children and those from neighboring ranches. Her progressive educational methods had gained attention beyond La Junta, with educators from as far as Denver coming to observe her techniques. La Junta itself had grown, the railroad bringing more settlers and commerce. The town that had once whispered about the notorious Gideon Zimmerman now pointed proudly to the Zimmerman family as one of its most respected. Sheriff Miller, now silver-haired but still sharp-eyed, had become a regular dinner guest and the boys' honorary uncle. "Any regrets?" Gideon asked softly, a question he still posed occasionally, as if part of him couldn't quite believe his good fortune. Olivia turned to him with the smile that still made his heart skip a beat. "Only that we didn't find each other sooner. We found each other exactly when we were meant to," Gideon replied, drawing her closer. "When I was ready to be found, when my heart was ready to thaw." As twilight settled over their land, and their boys ran laughing toward them, arms outstretched for an embrace, Gideon Zimmerman once feared. Now beloved gave thanks for the blizzard that had brought Olivia Hayes into his life, for the woman who had seen beyond his notorious reputation to the man he could become, and for the warmth that had replaced the cold loneliness of his past. In saving her from the frozen wilderness, he had found his own salvation and in her arms, a love to last a lifetime.